Good afternoon. Welcome to our fourth installment of our virtual seminar Grove, and we're really excited about our discussion today. There are two wonderful guests that are going to be helping us today, and we're going to be talking about the technical director's approach to scenic design. And we have our the scenery director for the Utah Shakespeare Festival, Dan Giedeman. How are you, Dan? Are you good? Good. We also have our production manager, Richard Curtain, who actually has been so far at all of our seminars. You just haven't seen him. He's the one running the board and making sure that we're all running correctly too. So why don't we start, first of all, with just an introduction. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how long your connection with the Shakespeare Festival. And then after that, we'll have Richard tell him a little bit about himself, and then we'll get to our presentation today.
Great. As we said, my name is Dan Giedeman. I am the scenery director. That is a fancy term for being in charge of scenery. I have been with the festival since 1997. I came out while I was in grad school and worked as a master carpenter for a couple of years, and then as an assistant technical director for 2 more years, and then switched over to props and had been in props for almost 12 seasons. So I was here 16 of 22 years. And then I had been watching this position, the scenery director position, for quite some time. And the stars aligned this time, and I was ready to make a change, and was lucky enough that the position was open. So here I am. And it's all a little bit different. I actually know more about the prop shop that Ben Holman runs and Mario Bonneau. Then I do my own shop. So I can find tools in there, but not necessarily in mine. So it's a bit of a learning curve, which is good. And it's a new challenge. One of the things that we're doing this is because of the COVID pandemic. Personally, this has actually helped me a great deal because it's actually given me the time to learn the job without the stress of an entire season on top of it. Because I would have been here just in the beginning of May, and we would have started load-in for the Ames Theater 3 days later.
Wow.
And we would have just now gotten everything open. So
yeah,
it's actually beneficial for me, which is incredibly selfish, but that's what it needed to be.
Cool. We're going to learn through this amazing discussion that we're going to have that there are many aspects of this job that you came knowing because of your experience before we came on camera. We were talking about your art skill and also your TD skill and all of that type of stuff. We'll talk about that as well. Richard, since this is your first time on camera, although you've been back here, you're an old hand at this. Tell us about your time here at USF and also your position.
Sure. Hi, I'm Richard Curtain, the new production manager. Like Dan, just getting started, but I have a long history with the festival. I started out as a master carpenter in 2003. Richard III was my first show back then. And over time, I actually eventually became the scenery director for a while. So I had a chance to do the work that Dan is learning to do now, and went away for a bit. Went around, worked as a technical director in a few other theaters, and then now I've had the opportunity to come back and try production management. And as a production manager, I am facilitating all the different elements of production. So I work with Dan, Ben, Jeff Leader over costumes. I work with Scott Palferman and his team over electrics, all the different elements of production. It's my job to help facilitate their work and to make sure they get the information that they need, and to work with the other lead staff, the creative team, the designers and directors, to fulfill their visions. So it's a little different role, but I understand intimately what Dan is going through, and hopefully part of this is I'm going to be able to help him be successful. So happy to be here to help have this conversation, and nice to be on the other side of the camera.
Cool. We're glad you're here. So let's just jump right in. One of the consequences of COVID is we had a whole season completely planned and ready to go, and including the show that we're going to be talking about today. So we actually have the designs that they were actually starting to build and put together, correct? I guess, had we started on the build for this show?
Not quite this one yet. We had
Yeah.
started with the Ains.
With the Ains and putting it together. But consequently, we've got all of the renderings and we're able to do that. And so they came up with a really great idea of sharing these renderings for this production of Pericles, which would have been on the stages this year. And you get to see that fully realized. And I think that's a great way for us to start. So go ahead, Dan. Tell us a little bit about that process.
So what we wanted to discuss was how a technical director approaches a scene design. So the scene design, if you look at it as the dream, the technical director's responsibility is to make that reality. Obviously with the help of props and lighting and costumes as an entire production team. But that's really our job, is to make the designs reality on our stage. So we have the Pericles designs that Apollo Mark Weaver is our scene designer. So he produced these. What we want to talk a bit about is what the approach is when you start looking at a design. So we have a set of renderings, and we're going to go through them one by one and then come back and talk about them a little bit more specifically. There are a lot of different steps to what we do. The first thing you need to do is actually read the play and have an understanding of what is going on with the play. Not necessarily every word, but more where they're going, where the feel is, kind of what the movement of the play is. Pericles, one of the things that stands out is there are multiple locations, lots and lots of locations. So how we do that and how Apollo worked through those is part of what we'll realize. So the first thing we do is you read the play. The second is we go through the renderings. And typically when we get the early preliminary designs, you get a set of renderings and probably a ground plan, which is a picture of what the elements look like on the floor of the stage. So our first pass is really just to be as objective as you can. You don't want to get specific. You don't want to look at things too closely. You just want to get a feel for what the show is. So here we're starting in Antioch with the head display. So it's Act 1.
Those are chopped off heads up there of people who are not successful in the riddle.
Yes. And then, Richard, if you want to pop through them, Michael is actually going to talk a little bit about where we go with each scene, because he is more intimately aware of how the show flows. And I just put him on the spot for that. So
yeah. I am on the spot now. The cool thing about this show, Pericles, is it takes place in multiple, many, it's one of the challenges, and also one of the great things for the show is that there are many places that you go, that he travels. So he flees the court when he figures out the riddle, and is out here. And I'm not sure, we're in Tyr here now, I believe, Prince of Tyre, Tyr. Yep.
Then from here we go to
Tarsus.
Tarsus.
Mm-hmm.
So a completely different feel from one scene to the next, which easily shows us that we've done a location change.
And you were talking before we went on camera that as a TD, as a technical director, you first kind of let the designs wash over you first, right? Before you start looking at, okay, they're looking at this, right?
Yes. So you go from a city, so you're in Tarsus, and now we're in the first storm. So a sail comes down because we're on a ship. And it's a little, this is the really interesting thing with the Ingolstadt is you have this Elizabethan base set that never goes. So it's the railings, it's the walls and the doors, and then we put things on top of it. Well, how do you create a ship? So a sail coming down takes you there immediately is what our hope is. And then from here we go to another shore. So this is a completely different look. The sail has gone up and out of the way. And then from there you go to a feast within that same setting. So a large table comes out, multiple people, they're all over the stage, having a party. Then from here you go to the death.
Very important scene, really important scene when she dies. Don't want to spoil anything, but
right. So we are back on the ship, which is important.
Yep. Yeah, they're on the ship and she dies there at sea and he is left without family. And what is he going to do as he loses his wife? Yep.
Yep. And then from there,
Back to Ephesus, actually.
Ephesus. So this is a completely different scene. And this one is more of an interior of a room, which is established by the things that the shelf and the table and the candelabra and such. And then from here, we go back to Tarsus. So there's a lot of back and forth in this show. Yep. So that will inform us on things later on that we're not supposed to be paying attention to at the moment. And then from here, it goes to
the brothel.
And the red fabric and things like that help establish that. The costumes will as well, I'm sure. And from here, we go to...
Yeah.
And then from there, back to the boat, to the ship. And then from there, it reveals
Diana. Yeah.
So when you're looking at this the first time, you're looking really just to enjoy what's there, to be a participant, almost like an audience member. You're not there to judge. You're not there to make assumptions. You just want to get a feel for what is going on. What's the warmth of the play? What are the colors? What are the, what's the paint, the color palette? Can you actually tell that you're in, it's northern Greece, the Aegean Sea, and Turkey. A lot of that is established by what you see on each piece. So the second time we go through this, it gets much more detailed. You start looking at the actual scenic elements. So as looking at this, one of the things you want to figure out first is, well, what is the base set? What is continual through every scene? And this is a great rendering to look at that, because you see that there are sets of columns in the inner below and the above. There's a large staircase, stone staircase on stage left, and there's two citables, what we refer to as citables, on the down left and right corners. So those are pieces that people can just go around and sit. You saw the one, the dining room scene where they were all, a couple of people were seated there. It gives a lot of variation in height, which is always important so that you can see over people to see people behind them. But if we go back to Antioch, other things you notice is the little square where the heads are on the metal pikes. That's actually our slip stage, which is a small moving platform that moves up and down stage. The inner below has the pictograms or pictographs that are inside essentially inside the panels of the wall. And then there's a large black curtain upstage. So the elements you find are, there's columns, there's a staircase, there's citables, there's the pictures, the panel inserts underneath, and then a large black curtain on top. And then the second scene, when you get to Tyre, here are two bright gold blue fabric that comes down. So the questions you ask with that is, well, how do they come down? So how is that, not necessarily how it's motivated, but how does that actually happen?
Yeah, you got to figure out how you're going to get that on and off, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So this will be, and if you've been to enough of the productions, you'll notice that we can drop these curtains in, which is called a Kabuki Drop. So they're up in a box, they're rolled up in a box up in the grid above. You hit a button and they roll down, they drop and roll down. And then at the end of the scene, you got to get rid of them because we're not back in Tyre again. So they'll have a second release that drops them to the floor, and the actors, or generally it's actor motivated, to get them off stage, which is a really good, quick way to get from one place to the next. And then when you go to the next slide with Tarsus, so between scene 3 and 4, the blue curtains have dropped, the slip stages come out, and then this really beautiful Turkish drop has come in. Well, that is actually designed as a roll drop. So it rolls off of a barrel, off of a tube, and it can roll back up because we go back and forth. It's not like the Tyre curtains, which are a one-trick pony. They just come in, fall, and they're gone.
Yeah.
This one
actually, you just know that by looking at that. You look at that curtain, you go, okay, we're going to do that roll drop wise.
Well, when you look at it, yeah, you have to notice that it's in at least two different scenes, so you know it repeats. So that's one of the things in the back of your head when you're supposed to be looking at it in this nice plain, not not looking at it in particular, that first pass, and go, oh God, it comes back. What do we do? And there's various theatrical techniques that you can use, and one of those is a roll drop.
Cool. Speaking of which, so you go to the next one. Now, shift's pretty important in this show. So when you go to the storm.
So when you go to the storm, the next, the big thing with this is, what is the wind going to do to this? Because if you've been out in the Ingolstadt or previously in the Adams, you know the wind can play a particular factor in what fabric does on stage.
Yeah.
So this is a sail. It needs to be lightish in fabric. You know, it's bright colored, and this appears multiple times as well. So the thought with this is it's actually going to be an Austrian curtain, or what they refer to as an Austrian curtain, which means everywhere there's a seam and on the outer edges, there is a pull line. So you would pull from the bottom and raise it all up in one time. So this is a big rigging trick where you have, I think it's 8 lines that you pull at once.
Wow.
That come into one control line that goes up and stays away. And then it comes back down. So it's a matter of, how can we do that fast and effectively? How can you actually make it disappear during the rest of the show? Because you don't want it hanging down and getting in the way of the lighting, or, you know, drawing attention to itself. Yeah. So Richard and I have actually talked about this one quite a bit.
Yeah. Do you also, is it you that makes the choice on the fabric? Because the TD or it says, okay, this is how I got to make this a reality. This is the designer's dream. He wants it to be this, but I think the best fabric will be this. Or is that a negotiation? How does that work?
The designer usually, Apollo will say, I think it is this fabric. So I think they're looking for this as a lightweight canvas. Mm-hmm. Some of that is whether we can dye it, because this color is meant to match, or pretty close to match, the tire panels that came with the gold and blue. So that's a bit of, they need to be dyed if it's regular canvas, because canvas only comes really in a neutral color, in that unwashed. So it's a little beigey, almost like the color of the lettering of the Pericles and the title below us. So it'll be a little of that. It's a lot of experience of what fabric does and how it bundles up, because it can't wrinkle. It can't, because it's just going to go up, come down, and it needs to look really pretty. I think the wind is actually going to help. It might go backwards, so it'll blow upstage more than downstage, but it should be an interesting piece. And I am not actually the technical director for the Ingolstadt. We hire a separate technical director for each theater, essentially. But when I talk to him about this, we'll discuss what these techniques are and how we can achieve that. So it's a communication between the two of us, and then the other technical director does most of the details.
So we've already got some questions coming in. I think it ties into what we're talking about right now. So Sarah asks, can you talk about how your design or the design is impacted by the fact that USF is a rep theater? And I was just thinking the same thing. So this curtain, we either have to strike it and load into the next set, or it's got to live in a permanent place for 3 different shows. So can you talk about how that's impacted?
A little of that is, it's a lot of discussion between the designer and some of the other elements, some of the other departments. So lighting in particular is affected by this. One of the thoughts we had is that it'll actually live in a box. So just like the tire curtains come down from a box, this might actually go, and it'll actually be more of a storage box, because repping this would be incredibly difficult because of all the lines that, essentially what I mentioned of, is the pull lines, the lines that are actually drawing the curtain up. It's really hard to rep those. So this one will most likely need to stay in the air the entire time.
And those discussions happen between all the designer.
Yeah. So when we do our preliminary and our production meetings, when we discuss the show scene by scene, this is one of the things we'll bring up is, we can't rep this. So the designers need to know that it's always going to be there.
Cool.
So in particular, the lighting designer, because it can affect what they're doing.
So another question from Marielle, if the items aren't in every show, where do you store the pieces that aren't on stage if it has to go away?
There's storage backstage. In particular, in this theater, it's backstage left. So there is a whole outer room that we would store most of the scenery. Some of it's depending on it, could fold up and hang on walls. A lot of the greenery that we've done in the past, actually we put hooks on the wall backstage, and they would just hang on the wall. And that's actually one of the things to really consider. Not as much in this space in the Ingolstadt as in the Randall, but when we do the shows in the Randall L. Jones, the storage of the scenery is as important as what's on stage, because you have, no matter if you have this giant set like they had for Hamlet last year, where does it go when the other show is on stage? So right. When Joseph was on stage, Hamlet was still there. It was just behind a curtain. So that's actually one of the things we have to consider a great deal is, if the show is this big, do we actually have room to store it?
And we're now starting to get into the breadth of your job, because you're not just talking about one show, you're talking about 2 theaters, 3 theaters, and you have to balance all of that, correct? So is that you as senior director who's doing that, or is that Richard, or is it a negotiation between both? And I'm wondering if we want to continue answering these questions with the reference to this concept script, or if we want to go back to full screen so we can see your faces. What do you think, Richard?
I would think full screen at this point, because we've kind of talked about the process, and we can talk a bit about that without the screen.
Yeah, cool. I just wanted to bring up one thing to tag on before we leave these. You know, you talked about the base set, Dan, and I wonder if in this rendering, there's something unique about the Ingolstadt that's, say, different than the Ames or the Randall, and that there's the theater, the base of the theater itself that we share amongst multiple shows. Can you describe how how we utilize that, or which parts of this rendering are the theater versus what we've done to sort of change the look of that?
Right. So the theater essentially is all the dark brown, the wood grain, the wood color behind it. Essentially, that is what it's like the presence of the Globe Theater. It's a reference to that. So the railings and the wood grain never go away. You're always in a theater. You have a kind of like a cup that's holding, you have this back wall that's always a part of it. And it's, that's why the panels underneath with all the ships and the people are inset panels. So they inset into that to help establish a location. So down underneath the sail is where, this is a great picture for that, because the black curtain upstairs and the above goes away. So you can see this more. It's the railings. The balcony itself is a strong indication of the theater itself. So when you're thinking about the Ingolstadt, you build more in elements, you build pieces. When you build in the Randall L. Jones, you're building the entire place. So with Hamlet last season, they had to build the walls and the staircases and all of that. Well, here the walls are already established. So you're putting elements within an established stage. The Adams Theater was exactly the same way. So you start with this Elizabethan base set and add pieces to it. So it's a lot. You actually have to have more of an imagination when you come to see the outdoor space than you do necessarily inside. Because inside we'll put you in the location. We put you in the giant mansion or something similar, where here it's like, oh, we're on a boat. Okay, well, the sail established that, and there'll be wind, and you'll hear the waves, and the sound department, the sound designer will reinforce that. So I think seeing things here is a lot more based on imagination. It's that suspension of disbelief. We're going to take you, all right, we're on a ship now. Well, now we're in a completely different place because we brought down a curtain. And you have to buy into that, which I think is one of the really neat things about Shakespearean theater in this type of setting.
2 very good questions that tie into what we're talking about here. Sarah, we're going to get to that really, there's a really great question here. He said, as part of the rep, are you ever able to configure the rigging of pieces to use for multiple shows using different attachments? So as you're repping that space while the walls are the same, are you able to use that for multiple shows?
Actually, one of the conditions we are. So the tire banners, the blue banners that hung down, those were actually going to be the boxes for those. Were going to be used in Richard III as well, because it has banners that come down later in the show and then get pulled down as well. So in a rigging standpoint, we were going to use those, which is similar. Um, Different pieces for different shows. It depends. Staircases are used that way a lot.
Mhm.
You know, if you do a traditional Gothic staircase, and that's all kind of the dressing on it, it's all the little arches. Um, you could use that. It was actually one of the solutions we were going to do on our truncated season that we were trying to plan, was that we were going to use the Book of Will set as the base set for the other, for Pericles and Richard and Comedy of Errors. So that would have actually made it more traditionally Shakespearean or Elizabethan, because you would have this really established, here's a little house underneath and things like that. So it really depends on the show and how vastly different they are from each other.
Cool.
Comedy of Errors is the one that was the most unique, because it was set more modern, more 1970s Greek.
Greek Isle, yeah.
So it's very bright and vibrant of colors, so it, just by the nature of that, it has to be different. But there are a lot of times we'll use the same staircases and things like that, because it's just, they need a staircase. It doesn't need to be much more than that.
And a similar question, which I think is very smart. This is from Randy. Are the floors completely removed for the other rep of the shows? And I do think, why don't you answer too, what the flooring looks like now and what it looks like once the season's open, because there's different floors there.
Right. So last year's season had a wood planked floor, and actually it was probably 4 years prior to that as well. This year we're going to a stone floor, so more of a stone look, which is specific for these 3 shows. And the floor is something, in the past it's been, the wood floor was actually original from when we moved into the Ingolstadt. So that wood plank floor is about 4 years old. So it's seen its lifetime. So it was time to replace it. So it can be by season. Richard and I are actually talking about doing another floor next year, so that we have a stone and a wood one that we can swap by season. But it is, you put a floor down for the season. So that's the look for the entire season, because we just don't have the time and people to rep an entire floor.
Yeah.
How do you handle that in the Randall? Do you do anything different in that facility than you would in the Ingolstadt?
The Randall, it tends to be, you actually separate by show. So this year we would have done Pirates of Penzance, which had its own floor. So it was on a wagon, so on wheels that rolled out of the way. The Hamlet was the same way last year. It had a rake stage, and that was a set unto itself. So that floor and the walls were all a part of that show, and that went away. And then you had that basic floor, the basic Randall, the stage floor for Joseph.
Yeah.
So it's one of the ways you compromise. So if we want Pirates of Penzance to have its own colored floor with the special boarding and stuff like that, then something else has to be on the base floor. So it's a compromise of what you use. Some years you just use the base floor, and that's what it is for all of them.
Cool. I think now is a good time to ask the question, and this is profound. Are you ready? What is scenery? What is scenery?
Well, the great thing is Ben Holman last week in his talk set us up really good for this. So he described it, when he described what a prop was, he said, scenery is the house. So we are the house. We build the house. We build the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the doors and windows. And then props comes in and decorates it. Or electrics comes in and puts all the light fixtures in and electrifies it. Now props gets the fixture, but the lighting department makes them light up and has that control. So that's really what we do, is we build the house that everybody else works in.
And the next question, and this will be for both of you, and both of you have worked in numerous theaters and in various capacities, which have prepared you for this. What is a technical director and what is a scenery director? And what's the difference between those two positions? And while I'm at it, I'm going to be a little more specific. What is a production manager and a scenery director, which we have here? Where does one start and the other starts? How does that work? So you want to start with, what is a technical director?
So a technical director is in charge of all the scenic elements. So just what we mentioned, the walls, the floor. Typically, well, depending on the theater. So here, the technical directors that are under my position so one's in Ingolstadt and one's in the Randall L. Jones. They're in charge of those shows for that space. So the scenic elements for that. So it's the construction, it's the building planning and the construction of the scenic elements. And you're in charge of the scenic artists who have to paint that aspect. A scenery director, it's a very special title. I've only known it to be here.
Really?
Yeah, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, because the technical directors were scenery. No, they were. What was the name they used to be, Richard?
Scenery supervisor.
Yeah, scenery supervisor. Yeah.
So typically the technical directors are in charge of a specific theater. So the Ains, the Ingolstadt, or the Randall L. Jones. I am in charge of all three of them. So I am the top of the scenery pyramid. As you know, Ben Holman is the top of the props ladder. You know, he has assistants, and then there's prop masters that work on each space. So here it's very much a theater specific for a technical director, where the scenery director is in charge of all of that.
But as you said before, in the position you used to be in, you were in another theater. You were the technical director, which means you were over everything except for costumes.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So TD, what's the difference between a TD and a production manager, if I can give that question to you, Richard?
Sure. You know, like Dan said, it's unique here at the festival. In a lot of ways because of the multiple spaces operating on parallel paths. You know, we're building and installing and teching and running the shows all at the same time. For one person to supervise that, it's almost impossible. So what happens is the scenery director is sort of an in-between in a different theatrical environment. A lot of what Dan does during the season as a scenery director is production management work. And we kind of cross over where large scheduling, movement of resources around, the allocation of transportation of trucks and things like that. He's doing a lot of those things at that time in the season when we're not fully in production. He's closer to a more traditional TD and only just building the scenery. Like that's enough, having done it for a long time.
Like 3 spaces, that's a lot of spaces to build for.
Just a little bit. So as the production manager here specifically, I'm facilitating, I'm making information flow is the biggest thing. Communication, when there are this many teams working simultaneously, the calendar, we live and die by the calendar here, everything, because multiple projects, and if anybody's a project manager out there, essentially we're project managers, but for theater, we overlap so many different processes that if somebody's not just like really involved in that, things get missed. I have a great partner with Tanya Searle, who's our production stage manager, and together we are working on, making sure all that information is flowing both to the production heads, to the scenery director and props director, but also to the acting company and the rest of the creative team, so that we all meet in the middle and that we all have the information each other needs to know in order to facilitate making the art happen. I mean, we have hundreds of people that work here during the summers when we're in full swing, and somebody needs to make sure that we keep all the balls in the air. That's kind of, that to me, that's the production manager primarily there. There's also a part that I think, to add to Dan's responsibilities and stuff that we work on together, is the physical plant, making sure that the shop functions, that it's set up in a certain way. It's a manufacturing facility, and he's responsible for that facility and making sure that, the tools are there, they're working, people have the right things. Health and safety is one of the largest responsibilities of the scenery director, technical director, and production manager, making sure that we're utilizing, government regulations, we're using better practices for construction and everything. That might be the most important thing we do, is keep everybody safe so they can go home at night.
Cool. I'm thinking, just as an example, if there's anyone who's been on a backstage tour of any of our spaces, I love showing in early season the calendar of the Randall and Ingolstadt usage. And I don't think people realize that both of those facilities at certain times are working 24 hours a day. And production manager's job is to make sure that lighting is able to get on there and light there. But at the same time, there's times when the carpenters have to get in and get installed. And there's times when the actual performers are getting into the space. And so regulating those multiple employees in and out of that space so that lights can have time, sound can have time, acting can have time, and scenery can all have time, and that there's enough turnaround to fix notes. All of that lives within the production manager's world, yes, stage manager and production manager's world. And obviously scenery is, making sure that the scenery is happening within those worlds. So there's a lot of intersection, right? Yeah.
It's a lot about communication and prior planning.
Yeah.
It's different levels. So the technical director is really only worried about their space necessarily, where it's my job to worry about how everything works together. How are we working with the lighting and sound departments and the prop department, and that's scheduling. And like Richard said, you live or die by the calendar. Yeah, we've already started that for next year. That what are the dates we think we're going to be working? When does lighting need the area? When does sound? When does stage management come in? Because all of that matters. Stage management comes in 2 hours before the show starts. Scenery needs to be done and out of the way and clean, no matter where we are. So it's a lot of prior planning.
Cool. So there's a really great question that Liz has asked. Liz, I'm going to get to it, and it's going to blow both their minds, and I love it. So you just keep hanging on. We'll get to that shortly. I have a question from Tanya. How does the TD take those designer renderings that were so beautiful that we saw and turn them into actual scenery? Let's start with that one, and then we'll jump to this doozy from Liz, okay?
Okay, so the rendering is really just the start of it. That shows you the picture. The designer will also do what are referred to as designer drawings. A way to look at it is the designer is the architect on a project, and the technical director is the engineer of the engineer team that actually gets it done. So we'll take their drawings and turn them into construction drawings. So they will give us like the staircase. You take the staircase, he's got the pretty picture of what it's supposed to be finished like. Well, I need to know how that's going to be built. So we'll do construction drawings of this board is here.
And that's you. That's your job to make those. Essentially, if you were looking at it, it's their blueprints, essentially.
Right. So we deal with the actual construction blueprints. And then at that time, you get it to a point, and then the painters take over. And the things that you have to think about are how does it come apart, especially with the rep. We're not like a standard theater where it's going to be up for a month. Ours is going to be up for another 3 hours, and then it's something completely different for tomorrow. So how you can rep it is one of the other really important things. How does it bolt together? What kind of pieces? What do you need to take it down? How many people need to move it? So that's the layer that is us. So you take that drawing, that beautiful picture, and make it reality, and make it function for the stage based on the time, the money, the labor that you have.
Cool. So this great question from Liz. Any suggestions for very portable set pieces that can be used, altered easily to represent different locations? I have no storage space, and it needs to be simple for the second grade Shakespeare plays that I do. And I know she was watching during Ben's because she had some really great questions too. So she's got a second grade space, and she's got to do all these Shakespeare plays. What are some key portable set pieces that she might need and help that can be adapted into everything you need in a Shakespeare play? And Richard, feel free to jump in here too.
Probably one of the first thing is a set of rehearsal cubes. So the little black boxes that you always see in rehearsal halls, it's like an 18-inch square or an 18-inch cube. Those can be incredibly useful because if you put 2 of them together, it's a bench. You put 3 of them together, it's a bed. You put 2 standing and 1 behind, it's a throne, and some type of doorway. You take a standard door and build a rolling frame on it, or a frame that can slide around on the floor, is probably all you really need. The rest you could do, a little bit like what Ben was describing. For a tree, you could do a cardboard cutout. You can, any of those things that can help with that. But kind of the base things that I would recommend is a set of rehearsal cubes that are light enough for the kids to move, and then some type of doorway, even if it's just a door frame.
Yep. Well done, Richard. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things, and the rehearsal, the rehearsal world, the easy portable, world is the thing that there's always lots of questions about that. I feel like if you think about something in the terms of making sure it's lightweight, think about the material you use to make it, and that makes sure that you can move it around either by yourself or with a buddy. I always encourage you to use two people to move things, however, but make sure it's something easy to move around, and make sure it's something that is as durable as you need to. How long does it need to last? So, like Dan says, with cardboard's great. You can actually buy 4x8 sheets of cardboard that are the size of what a traditional flat would be. I would add to Dan's list, if you want to expand just a little bit, I would go to some kind of curtain, some kind of fabric. So if you want to create a separation between a backstage and a downstage, fabric is light, easy, super easy to store, stuff it in a box, whatever. The next level is like flattage, and you make what we call as a flat. We work in two things mostly in scenery. It's either a flat or it's a platform. Flats are vertical surfaces and platforms are floors. And I'd say 90% of what we do is a flat or a platform. Then we fill in a lot of other things. But if you want to get a little more sophisticated, you can do things that we call bifold flats, which are two basically pieces of plywood that hinge in the middle, and you can create a thing that stands up on its own and can create a little separation. And platforms, it's those are even bigger and a little bit more complicated. But then if you needed some elevations, those things can do it. Cubes are the best because they can act. Sometimes they can even be a little platform if you put a couple together. They can be a stair. They could be so many things.
And if they hinge, that's where you can store your props.
Exactly.
And your curtains and things. The other thought I had, I was thinking about this last night because you just assume this is coming up. If you ever played with refrigerator boxes, because as a kid we used to play with those, that you'd make a house. You get one of the refrigerator boxes from Home Depot or one of the appliance stores. You can make anything. You can make a castle. You can, you cut a door hole in it and it has a hinge all by itself. So there's a lot of creative ways. Space is always the hard part though. Where do you put it afterwards? And that's a kind of a commitment but once they realize that, if we get a set of 6 rehearsal cubes, a door, maybe a couple of flats, that's all they need for a really long time, because it's theater and you make believe with what you have. But yeah, you have to have a little bit of room to start.
I think if you've ever built a fort with your children, it's if you have some aunts, uncles, nieces and nephews, it's that kind of thing. I mean, take those materials you get from the Amazon picture that package that was sent to you, and you create something out of it. All those things are possible. A lot of it is how long you want to keep it.
Cool. And on the other end of the spectrum, what are some of the tools you use to do your job? Not just hammers and saws. What software and other technology, CNC, the design programs that you use to do all that rendering? What type of things do you use?
Well, one thing to remember with drafting, so we use AutoCAD specifically, at least the Technic-Director does. Most of our designers use a program called Vectorworks. Mm-hmm. It's a right and left side of the brain sort of programming difference. But I've also done scenery.
Hold. I've got to hold Richard accountable for that smile he just had.
Well, but I've
also right and left side of the brain. Are there right side of the brain people in your shops and left side of the brain people in the shops?
But as Richard is trying to learn how to use a Mac computer, when we are PC based, it is a left and right side. It's a total different way to think. But one of the things that you have to realize is that technology is great, but it is not everything. I have done drawings for scenic units on napkins or just a piece of paper. AutoCAD it's another tool that you have to learn. It's not something you're going to pick up in 3 minutes. But a piece of paper and a pencil work really well. We're going to post a list of books that are great for research and reference.
Let me amplify that. There's going to be a list of books that these guys use. Isn't that great? We're going to post it.
But they also have like the CNC router. So it's an electron, you have a table and it cuts the shape that you want. The great thing about that is that you can be incredibly accurate and you can produce a lot of different things. Like we would route the pattern in the floor. depending on the thickness. But it's also that just replaces, it's sort of a balance between time and labor and a little bit of money, because that's the triangle that we deal with all the time is the money. It either costs, either you spend the money because you don't have time and labor, or you do labor because you have time but not money. So the router is really a replacement for a jigsaw or a bandsaw. I think in some ways it's great. I worked in a shop that anything that wasn't like a 4x8 sheet, they routed because it was just that much quicker. In some ways, I don't like it because people forget how to use the other tools. And you don't always work in a place that, I mean, this will be the second place that I've worked that I had access to a CNC router. So I did theater for years without it. But there's also, we use our traps. We use like a lot of the paper effects in Book of Will last year. There was one that it was a car wheel. It was like a motorized car, like the remote control car that spun the paper out and threw it all over the place. Well, the best effect for that was the crew coming out and just throwing it out of their hands. It's what half the effect became, because it was the simplest way to make that happen. And Richard might laugh at this, but I'm a very much keep it stupid simple. The simplest way is usually the best, because if you pull a string, you know that's what the trick is. But the more technology you add onto it, the more that can go wrong. I think it's great, and we will always strive to do it. But I really miss the days where you pull a string and an effect happens, or like I think Ben, I don't know if Ben mentioned it, but we were talking recently about Blithe Spirit. You have all this stuff, the shaking tables, everything's flying off the walls, books are coming off the walls, and everything's tipping. You can still do that with a stick. You just have a hole behind the book and push. But I'm a much simpler.
But sometimes simple is not easy. I mean, a lot of times we forget the simplest solution because it is sometimes the more creative of the solutions, right?
Can be. You can get lost in the technology very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we do very well here. We have a lift in both Ingolstadt and the Randall L. Jones, a trap that comes out, and you saw in the one rendering where the statue of Diana comes out, our statue comes out of the floor. We've used that quite a bit, but that's a lot of technology.
Cool. Question from Tracy: are all scenic pieces moved by crew members, or do you have automation systems that handle some of that? I think you've just answered that. How is that determined? Is it that, again, triangle, time, labor, or,
A little bit, but it's also what the feel of the show is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, like in Joseph, all of the characters would have moved everything because there were so many people on stage that it's really easy to move the scenery around. Because once you have, that's one of the discussions we'll have, is this actor motivated, or is this crew? So if it's crew, that's where you get into the crew members or you get into automation. But if it's actor operated, like the curtains will fall, is an actor just grabbing and taking it off, or do we have to pause? Because it's all about the flow of the show. An actor moving a chair and things like that takes less time and interrupts the show a little less than if everything stops, a crew member walks on the 20 feet to get on stage, moves the chair. So we tend to look at it where, okay, if it's a big intermission shift, the crew could deal with it. So moving of sets and big pieces, resetting of furniture and tables, but anything in the middle of the action, I've always found that it's best for the actor to move it because it distracts less.
I think that's really important, and it kind of goes back to what Dan was saying in the first pass of looking at the design. It's, just kind of bring it in and think about how we're telling the story. First place we start with is the story, and how do we keep that moving, and how do we make sure that the choices we're making are not detrimental to that process of trying to communicate the vision of the show. So that's the first thing we'll do. And then, it's always a negotiation about those things, but at the heart of everything, and I think you'll hear this as we talk to other department heads when we get a chance to have seminars with them, it always starts with that script, and it always starts with that creative idea, and all these choices start there, and then they get adjusted based on the realities of what we're dealing with.
Yeah. How big is the area under the Ingolstadt? This is from Randy. How large is that pit area under there?
if you're thinking about the stage itself, we have two ramps that come up stage left and right that are kind of in front of a set of walls. From those ramps down toward the house is the kind of the trap room.
And then it drops down quite deep underneath there.
It's about 15 feet, 15, 16 feet, I think.
And it's rigged up in such a way so that you could have, there are established traps, but you could put traps in any part of that stage, correct?
You could, yes. We're kind of, at the moment, we're kind of limited to the center 6 foot square. Richard, can you go to the farther down on the, where the statue is coming up is a great way to look at that. Cool. One before it. I think it's 5-1. Oh, no, you got it. So that's kind of the square. We're limited to that section. The 4-stage, that front area was built to be able to have different panels removed. But this is kind of what we've established.
Cool.
Yeah, everything downstage of the columns, pretty much, right, Dan, is the trap room. Yeah.
And how does weather, especially Utah's weather, influence how you make decisions about scenery, especially in the Ingolstadt?
It certainly affects every decision about fabric. A little bit will be texture on the floor based on rain and water, because if you use the wrong texture or sealer, it can become much slicker. That's why for rain here, I think they lose about the first 4 foot of stage, I believe. So the actors know when it's raining, they just can't come down that far. So they've actually had rehearsals telling them that and how to adjust based on rain. Cool. Now in the Randall, it doesn't matter unless it really rains, and then the fire alarm goes off sometimes. But the Adams Theater was completely different. You would move inside to the auditorium.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't do anything about rain there. But the sun actually had a lot of effect during those first couple of years that we were in the Ingolstadt. How bright the sun was from the west. So now you see, even in the Seminar Grove, the actual, not the virtual, there's all the tent coverings and stuff.
Yeah.
That's what they actually had to do. It was like, oh, we forgot the sun. Because I don't know if it affected the actors as much as it did the audience, because they would just bake.
Yeah.
But that was one of the considerations. And outdoor theater is very much that way.
Cool.
You tend to watch the weather reports a lot.
It wouldn't be a complete session if we didn't ask these questions. So Marie asked, what's the hardest set you've ever built and the biggest? So think of those. And while you're at it, can you talk about one of the most challenging sets or scenic elements that you had to put together?
Oh my.
The hardest set you've ever built, the biggest, and perhaps, challenging set or scenic elements.
Anytime you have to make it rain on stage. I had to do that for Eurydice at a different theater. Water in particular is the worst. Is the worst of everything. Here, I'm not so sure. Because my experience with carpentry was so early in my time here, sometime before this century, and it was just so much fun. There was no, you worked 7 to 11, 6 days a week. It just didn't matter. It was that cool experience.
Sometime I need to have you come back to talk about the history, because I remember when those shops were not inside, and some of that building happened outside.
Oh, yes. The Randall Dock, for
instance. Has a great picture of someone welding in the Adams in the snow.
Yeah.
It was mid to late May.
Yeah.
So
we're fortunate now that we have shops, but I still find people outside, because as the sets get bigger, everyone's finding a space to get out everywhere.
Space will always be our biggest hurdle, especially during the build process. Because not only do you need places to build, you need places that are clean to paint. Yeah. So the painters actually they don't normally paint out here at the Bulldog building because that's where all the dust is. So they're in the auditorium, or they're in the Randall painting backstage, or sometimes they're in the loading dock of the Ingolstadt.
But even these things you're talking about, I think, are things that people don't think about. Why can't you paint there? Well, because there's sawdust all the time. And
Which is great if you need texture, but not if you need clean paint.
right. And there you are thinking of texture again. I want to make sure there's a number of questions we haven't got to. I know where both of you came from, and I know you have so much experience that have made you kind of who you are. So I kind of want to close with, how do you become a scenic designer, or excuse me, technical director or scenery director? What would you recommend to somebody if they, have an affinity for this and they want to continue on as a carpenter and be involved in either TD or scenery direction or scenery designers? Those are three different major things.
I've talked a lot, Richard. What do you think?
It's a very diverse skill set. I'll say being a technical director, anything you can do, anything you can learn about how to make something, about materials, about managing a project, about time and labor estimating, about technology. You'll never, every technology that's out there in some way, shape, or form that's around construction or making something move or computers is probably something that could be applicable. I encourage people to read as much as you can, learn from other people who've been doing this for a long time, try to find out as many different kinds of perspectives. Each of us is sort of this blend of all the things we've experienced, the people we've learned under. We learn what to do, sometimes what not to do. You're going to make some mistakes. You're going to make some choices that maybe aren't perfect, but that's okay. Evaluate them, and try to give yourself that opportunity to absorb as many things as possible. I think there's a tremendous number of resources out there, books, training programs, work in different places. Don't think that you have to immediately become a technical director. I think there's learning from doing other jobs that are related. Be a carpenter, be a run crew person, be a drafts person, then, work your way up. Work in other departments, work in lighting and props. Those are transferable skills. So just grab as much as you can and try to just keep developing those skills. You never stop. It's not a finish line. It's a process, and you're going to keep grabbing new things. So that's what I'd say about trying to become a technical director.
Cool. Just so you know, we're going to be posting a series of books, correct, on the Facebook page, in the link here so that you can find that. And there's some really, really great resources there. Richard, do you have, not Richard, Dan, do you have any other comments in regards to the path to where you are? How do we become a Dan Giedeman?
One of the things that I would suggest is remember that there is always more than one way to build something. There is always more ways than you can ever imagine. Your way is not necessarily wrong. The way you're taught is not necessarily wrong, but realize it is not the only way to get from point A to point B. I highly recommend you become a jack of all trades. I've spent time in costume shops. I learned so much in there about detail, attention to detail. I've been on stage in undergrad and grad school because it's important to know what the actors go through and why that path backstage needs to be clear. Or it affects props a great deal more about how something is handled, why a door works a certain way. All of that affects, but all of it affects what you're doing. But to be a better technical director, you have to experience everything, which is really hard to do. But the more you can, the more that you understand the other areas, the better you will be at what you do.
Like I just learned something before we started. That gorgeous picture he's got back there, I thought, wow, that's really great. Dan doesn't want everybody to know that he's a painter and that he paints and that he has those skills too. So we're really looking at two men here who do multiple things, but it's your ability to do those things that allows you to protect and defend the painters who work for you, the carpenters who work for you, the welders that work for you, and the designers and directors who also work for us.
Right. And nothing is personal. It's all about communication skill. And just breathe. Take a breath. If somebody comes at you with a really scary thing, take a breath first. Take a step back. It'll all be okay.
Oh, bless you. Bless you. Thank you very, very much. Really, really enjoyed this time. We are going to be seeing more of them through the season, and we look forward to seeing more of you. I want to do a special thank you and shout out to Tanya Searle, who has been helping get our Facebook questions and doing that. We appreciate her. Don't see her face here, but you will be seeing her face shortly because we're going to be hearing about her position later on within the season. Also want to do a thank you to Cedar City and Bryan Head Tourism Bureau, which sponsors these. We'd invite you to still come down to Cedar City. There's great canyons to hike here, etc. We're looking forward to seeing you all next year, where all of these same principles we're learning now will be applied as well. Stay on our Facebook, and you will continue to learn about other things that we have next week. Next Thursday at 10 o'clock, we have a wonderful guest who's going to be talking about the canon, and he has performed every play within the Shakespeare's canon, and he's performed here on the stages of USF. His name is Renee Thornton, and I want you to join that. And we're looking forward to the production seminar next week as well, which is going to be what, Richard? What are we talking about next week?
We're talking about stage management next week with Tanya.
Absolutely. So you will meet the great Tanya Searle. Thank you very much, and enjoy.